What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's community tips ahead of Game Week 2. So what I've done is put out a survey on Twitter, asked for people to fill it in, giving their opinions on a bunch of questions just to see how they're setting up ahead of Game Week 2. We've got over 2,000 responses this week as well. So a pretty decent sample size, right? Obviously, it's quite small compared to overall FPL managers, but it's good to see what engaged managers do. So if you do enjoy this content, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Let me know down in the comments below if you are liking this video as well. I know there is some crossover for my team selection and game week preview and stuff like that, but I think it's good to get a broader range of manager opinions when we talk through decisions ahead of the next game week. So this one was really interesting. So first of all, I asked which premium attackers will you own in game week 2. Now, if you remember from last week, Salah was obviously highly owned. I think it was around 90% anyway, but Haaland and Kane were about 50-50 split. I think it was about 49-49 for both of them. And obviously there was a few Sons and a few De Bruynes in there as well. Now you can see the template has shifted massively. Obviously we can see that from transfers in and transfers out. But I think the core community, like those that follow content creators on Twitter, YouTube, get involved in discussions, sometimes have a different way of playing to what overall managers do. So the likes of Mitrovic and Zinchenko have also been heavily transferred in. But I'd imagine if I'd asked questions about them on this survey, they wouldn't have been quite as popular. So this is pretty crazy. Haaland's ownership from the 2,000 plus people that replied is almost as much as Salah's. So we know this week he's going to be highly owned. It doesn't mean you have to bring him in if you haven't already. It doesn't mean you have to panic, but you just know that if he does well again, there's going to be an even bigger kind of reason to possibly go for him for game week 3, because it might get to the point where his ownership is so high, he's going to be hard to ignore. So it is going to be scary going without him against Bournemouth at home, but if you can get through that, it might look a little bit better come game week 3. So I'm not going to do a separate captaincy video this week, so I thought I would incorporate the discussion into this video instead. You can see what the community's doing, and I can give you my opinion on some players as well. So I simply asked, who is your Game Week 2 captain? Out of everybody that responded, 77.9% of them are going for Haaland. Now I am too, to be honest with you. I just cannot look past that Bournemouth at home fixture. It was kind of the plan before Game Week 1 anyway, so I'm just really following through with that. So I think he's a great option. But Salah at 19%, I'm surprised the gap is so big. It kind of makes sense when we look at the previous slide where Haaland is now massively owned and obviously has just got 2 goals and now he's got that great fixture. But I feel like when we see overall FPL manager data, the gap will be a little bit smaller. You could see this if you're keen on going for Salah or you just don't have Haaland as an opportunity to go against those engaged managers that are all opting for the Man City man instead. I'm not saying Salah's like a true differential. He's not going to be like 5% owned and 10% captained or something like that. He's still going to be very heavily captained, but he does look like he's going to be a bit of a differential versus Haaland. And given his pedigree and what we see him do all the time at home, you could look to opt and go a little bit different this week if that's the way you're kind of thinking. But for me, I think with Bournemouth at home, it's got to be Haaland. De Bruyne is a perfectly okay captain, but I don't think he's as good as Haaland. I mentioned that pre-season. Out of all the premium attackers, I felt like De Bruyne was probably the worst one. When it comes to Arsenal attackers, a few people have asked me about whether I think they're good options. Look, I think they're going to get goals against Leicester at home. I think Jesus, Saka and Martinelli, you could all put as outside captaincy options, but I don't think they're anywhere near Salah or Haaland. I just wouldn't go for them. I think owning them is probably differential enough, especially if you've got 2 or 3 of them. So for me, they're just not great captaincy options this week. I think Bournemouth away next week, Fulham at home in game week 4. There's more of a temptation for me to go sometime there, probably in game week 3 when Haaland's got Newcastle away, Salah's got Man United away. I'm sure there'll still be really popular choices. I'm sure I'll still go for one of them, but I'd be more likely to go with an Arsenal player next week rather than this week. So given how well the forwards did in game week 1, there's been a lot of discussion about moving to a 3-forward formation. So I asked people how they were thinking about this. Are you tempted by a 3-forward formation? Obviously, we all have to have 3 forwards. So I made the point that this is when you start 3 forwards most weeks. So most people are sticking with 2. That's where I'm at right now. I mean, the difference is just 1 striker. You're essentially saying instead of that extra striker, I'm having an extra midfielder or an extra defender instead. And yes, the likes of Mitrovic Perisic and Haaland and Tony and Wilson and Nunez, etc., all did really well, but so did quite a few of the midfielders, so did quite a few of those premium defenders like Reece James, Cancelo, etc. I don't think we need to start thinking about completely overhauling our structure just to get that extra one in. Mitrovic's fixtures are not fantastic after the next two. Nunez, okay, sure, if he starts, he could be a good option, but I don't think we need to completely panic after just one game week. Interestingly, question 3 was, yes, I'm looking to move to 3. 26.3% are thinking about it and 9% are already on it. So it's actually quite high given how much kind of 5-4-1, 4-5-1, 4-4-2, etc., how popular they were for game week 1. There is quite a few people thinking of switching, and I think Nunez in particular is one player that people really want to get in. So it'll be interesting to see after game week 2 if opinions change even more, or if people start using their 2 free transfers and maybe an extra hit to convert to having 3 up front. I've looked at 4-3-3 as well myself, but again, it's literally just one player, 4-4-2 to 4-3-3. Am I confident enough that Diaz or any other £8 million midfielder is now definitely worse than getting an extra striker in? No, not after one game week. So speaking of Darwin Nunez, I asked people, is it too early to put him in our sides? And 69.1% of you said yes, it is a bit too early, let's wait and see. 30.9% of you were happy just to get him in straight away. And again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad move, right? Is it the move that I'm going to do? No, probably not. Certainly not for game week 2. But I don't think it's a completely awful move or anything like that. I think it's just like a confidence thing. Am I confident enough that Nunez is definitely the best third Liverpool player if we assume that most of us are going to have Trent and Salah? Is he much better than Diaz, much better than Robertson? There is a chance that he could outscore both of them over the next 4 to 6 weeks as long as he gets enough minutes, but he is also more expensive. So for me, for example, the easiest way to get him in would be Cucurella down to a £4 million defender like Nico Williams to get that extra money in, swap Luis Diaz to a 4.5 million midfielder, and then get Nunez in up front. So I've got to sell one of my Liverpool players. So that would be a switch to 4-3-3. Essentially, I'd have Nunez instead of Diaz, but I'd also have Nico Williams instead of Cucurella. Now, obviously, you can just turn around and say Cucurella's not a great pick, but that could be any £5 million defender. So suddenly then my bench is weakened as well. So for me, I am more of a kind of cautious manager, especially early on in the season. So I want to see a bit more from him. I know when you do that, you can miss out on a few points, but I just don't think he's so good that it's going to hurt the rest of my team by not getting him in straight away. So I am going to talk about Perisic one more time later on today in the final thoughts video. That should be out maybe late afternoon, early evening. The reason I want to do that is because I'm recording this video on Thursday evening, so I haven't yet heard from Conte. I want to see what he says before I make a final decision of what I think people should do. But I thought it was good to put it to the masses as well. So should Perisic owners sell in game week 2? 77.5% of people that responded said no. And I kind of get that. That was my thinking earlier on in the week. If you were willing to take the risk on someone who could have been an absolute great option for 5.5 million, maybe you should just hold on to him a little bit longer. The only thing that I can see happen as we get closer to the deadline is I'm going to feel more like you should just cut your losses, because if he doesn't start against Chelsea and Sessegnon has another good game, you're then stuck with the same issue against Wolves where you're not going to want to sell him because it's a good fixture, but there's no guarantee he will start. So a lot of this is going to come down to what Conte says. If he continues to say, you know, the new players are getting better, they've still got a bit to learn, Perisic isn't quite up to full fitness yet, he continues to work, that doesn't necessarily mean he won't start, but it would indicate that another Sessegnon start could be fairly likely. So I feel like cutting your losses before Chelsea away might be a good move. I really try not to sit on the fence with this one, but it is a difficult one to kind of decide on. One thing I will say is your squad setup might have a factor in what you decide. So if you've got a good bench option, even if it's like Andreas Pereira against Wolves, or you've got another cheaper defender that's got a good fixture, you could just play them this week. Bench Perisic. It's not a great fixture anyway. I could see Chelsea scoring. And then if he plays, okay, great, you've got him for Wolves at home. And if he doesn't play, okay, well, you didn't get his cameo off the bench anyway. You played someone else. And now maybe you can just sell him ahead of game week 3. So I think that would probably play a part in my thinking. If I had an awful bench and no one I really wanted to play, then maybe you just cut your losses now. If you've got someone you can play and Conte indicates that there's a chance he might start or that he's getting close to full fitness, maybe you do just give him one more week. So I asked people what transfer moves they were making this week. I think it's quite funny. We spend all the pre-season switching around our teams, coming up with that final draft for game week 1. And because we've set it up so well, we don't want to make any transfers for game week 2. So essentially we've got nothing really to do for 2 weeks. But I thought it was good to see what everyone else is doing. So 61.8% of people are rolling a transfer. They're not making a move in game week 2. Then one transfer is 32.3%. Unsurprisingly, no transfers or one transfer take up the most amount of replies. Some people apparently are making 2 transfers, 3%. There's 2.1% of you using a wildcard or free hit. I think in most cases you don't need a wildcard, so I wouldn't panic about it. And free hit is probably more useful later on in the season. Then supposedly 0.8% of you are making 3 transfers, which again seems pretty crazy, but I suspect some people have knee-jerked. They didn't have an easy way to get Haaland, and so they've made the transfers they needed to get him. So yeah, if you're in the boat where you're kind of bored because you want to make a move, but you know it's better to wait till game week 3, just remember a lot of people are in the same boat. So there's lots of conversations this week around whether people should start Andreas Pereira and maybe even ahead of Neto or Bailey. And like I said on the game week preview yesterday, people have different combinations of these players. For what it's worth, my preference is Neto, then Bailey, then Andreas Pereira. But if we start to get spooked by predicted lineups for Villa, or Gerrard says he's going to change things around, you could put Bailey at the bottom of the list. And most people seem to kind of agree with this. So 64.4% of people would start Leon Bailey and Pedro Neto ahead of Andreas Pereira, which makes a lot of sense because that's how people set their teams up in the first place, that Andreas Pereira would be a bench option. The next highest, 19.4%, which is fairly significant, would play Andreas Pereira ahead of Bailey, but not ahead of Neto. So there is that kind of thinking in the community that Neto is the top one out of these 3 for this week. Fulham at home is a pretty good fixture. But there are some people that are concerned about Leon Bailey now and would play Andreas Pereira ahead. Then we've got Andreas Pereira ahead of Neto, but not Bailey at 8.8%, which I found a little bit crazy, to be honest. And then they would play, and then 7.5% of people would actually start Andreas Pereira ahead of both of these. I know there's a lot of kind of hope and hype around how Andreas Pereira played against Liverpool. He was advanced, but in terms of his underlying numbers, they were okay. He played against Liverpool, so it was going to be difficult anyway. I don't think I personally saw enough there to say that he is now an out-and-out better option than Neto. I know prices play a part with our thinking from a psychological point of view, right? If we see someone that's cheap, we automatically assume they should be on the bench. There might be a case at some point this season where Andreas Pereira is playable in a lot of weeks for 4.5 million, but I personally have not seen enough so far to tell me that that is the case. So I would still stick with Neto, then Bailey, then Andreas Pereira. But if we hear something from Gerrard that makes me think Bailey's not going to start, then of course he goes to the bottom of the list. So I asked people, would they sell Mason Mount in game week 2? And interestingly, although no was the bigger percentage, a lot of people said yes, 41.9%. Now you might think, okay, everyone that replied is just a non-Mason Mount owner and they want you to get rid of him so they're one transfer ahead or whatever. But if you think about the Perisic question, 77.5% of people said they would hold on to him. And I can't imagine that out of everyone that responded, they all happen to be Perisic owners, but not Mason Mount owners. I kind of get it, okay? He didn't play that well in game week 1. I think Havertz was probably worse, but he didn't play that well at all. And now he's got Spurs at home. There's quite a few other £8 million mids that you could change to, like Diaz if you've not got 3 Liverpool, although I expect most people do. You could go to Saka if you've not got 3 Arsenal. He looks like a great option. And even Foden with Bournemouth at home and then a good fixture run could be someone you go to as well. It's just whether that move is more valuable than having that extra free transfer in game week 3. And I think I still side with holding on to him and then deciding what you want to do in game week 3. I get it because it is a difficult fixture, right? I don't expect many returns for him against Spurs at home. But if he plays well at least, he does then have 3 really nice fixtures straight after, including like Leeds, Leicester and Southampton. And at that point, if he does get something against Spurs, you'll be really glad you held on to him because you'll probably then keep him longer term and you'll have a transfer to use elsewhere. So it's one of those where I don't think moving to Foden or Saka is a bad move, right? They've got good fixtures. Foden in particular this week is decent. Saka's got Leicester, then Bournemouth, then Fulham. So I do expect them to possibly score more points than Mason Mount over the next 3. But when you start looking a bit longer, next 4, next 5, I think it's a bit closer. So I don't know. To me, it's a little bit surprising that 41.9% of people said they would sell him. I think I'd probably just about stick with him. I just really like the idea of having that extra transfer in game week 3. So there we go. Hopefully you enjoyed that one and found it useful. If you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here as well. Drop me a comment below. Were you surprised by any of the percentages for any of the questions? I know, for example, we've seen a lot of talk about Kane to Haaland, but sometimes actually seeing on screen just how much the ownership's changed or people's captaincy thoughts have changed and stuff like that can be really interesting. So let me know in the comments below if any of that surprised you. Otherwise, I'll leave it there. I'll be back later on for final thoughts. Make sure you check that one out. Give this one a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.